In October, Sanae Takaichi became Japan's first female prime minister. 4 months later, women held just 13% of management positions in the country, the lowest share among all G7 nations.
Western coverage treated the Takaichi appointment as proof of arrival. A G7 economy, long mocked for its gender gap, had finally broken its highest glass ceiling. The story wrote itself, except the numbers underneath it tell a completely different story than the headline.
Here is the actual question worth asking. Japan already solved the problem most commentators think it has. It did not solve the one that actually matters.
Start with what Japan got right. Japan's female labor force participation rate hit a record 100% in Nisan. For women in their early 30s, the group historically pushed out of work by marriage and childbirth, participation now sits above 98% according to the OECD. As we covered in episode Hashiji, in Japan's female participation rate quietly overtook the United States back around Nisan and has stayed ahead since. On the question of does she work, Japan is not the story people think it is.
On the question of does she rise, it is exactly the story people think it is. The Tokyo Stock Exchange tracks female executives at its top-tier prime section companies. As of July, Nissan Maruo finds that figure was 3%, a genuine improvement, up from 3% the year before. But zoom out from the roughly 10% elite prime companies to the broader Japanese corporate landscape, and the picture changes fast. A July Nissan Maruo Fine survey of over 1% Japanese companies found that women hold just 3% of management positions.
The World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report puts Japan 118th out of 50 countries in Nithan Arsawuv, unchanged from the prior year, and dead last among G7 nations on female management representation.
The pay numbers move even slower.
This is where the Takaichi story gets more interesting than the headline suggested. Takaichi entered office promising what she called a Nordic parity cabinet, matching the near-even gender balance common in Scandinavian governments. Some Japanese outlets ahead of the announcement reported speculation of as many as 6 female ministers. When Takaichi unveiled her 18-member cabinet on October 5th, it contained 2 women, Satsuki Katayama, named Japan's first female finance minister, and Kimi Onoda, the cabinet's youngest member, appointed to a newly created Economic Security and Foreign Nationals portfolio. At her inaugural press conference, Takaichi said she had prioritized equality of opportunity and selected ministers on qualifications.
That is a defensible principle for staffing a cabinet. It is also, mathematically, the same outcome the private sector produces every year. A woman reaches the very top, and the layer immediately beneath her barely moves.
Why does Japan's workforce fill with women while its leadership doesn't? The mechanism traces back to how Japanese employment is structured, not to who gets hired.
As we detailed in episode Sherlock, Japan's post-war employment system built 2 separate tracks: a regular track with job security, seniority pay, and a path to management, and a non-regular track of part-time and contract work with neither. That system was never gender neutral, Roughly 60% of Japanese female workers hold non-regular positions compared to about 20% of male workers. Women re-entering the labor force after childbirth, the very trend driving Japan's record participation numbers, disproportionately re-enter through the non-regular track because it offers flexibility the regular track doesn't.
That flexibility comes at a cost. Non-regular roles almost never lead to the promotion committees, the seniority ladders, or the executive shortlists that regular track employment does.
In other words, Japan didn't build one broken pipeline. It built two separate pipelines, sized very differently, and funneled women disproportionately into the one that dead ends before management. The government's own targets acknowledge the gap is a policy problem, not a cultural inevitability. Tokyo Stock Exchange prime companies were set an interim goal of at least 2% female executives by Nithen Arsawuv, a target Kidan Ren member firms essentially hit, reaching 2%. The next goal is 30% by Nithen Sansherdane. In starting April each Nithen Arsaluk Japan expanded mandatory gender pay gap and female manager ratio disclosure to companies with as few as 4 employees up from the previous 300 employee threshold.
Every mid-sized Japanese employer must now publish, on a public website or government portal, exactly what share of its managers are women, and exactly what fraction of a man's salary the average woman there earns. Investors, job applicants, and competitors can all see it.
Disclosure alone hasn't worked before. Japan's largest companies have published pay gap data since 2022, and the national number barely moved. What's different this time is scale. Roughly look 1 additional companies covering a much larger share of Japan's actual workforce now have nowhere to hide the number.
This is the real Japan factor. In the story, Japan treats workforce participation and leadership advancement as two entirely different engineering problems, and it has only finished solving one of them. The labor shortage that pulled women back into paid work, explored in episode Hachi-e, was driven by economic necessity. Companies needed workers badly enough to make part-time re-entry attractive. No equivalent force has yet made promoting women out of that same track economically unavoidable. A disclosure law is a start. It is not the scarcity mechanism that already fixed the participation half of this equation.
If you want to keep up with stories like this, subscribe to the Japan Factor. Japan now has a female head of government and a female finance minister, genuine hard-won firsts. Whether that translates into a female majority promotion committee at a mid-sized manufacturer in Osaka is a different question entirely, and it's the one Japan's new disclosure law is about to make impossible to avoid answering.